Okay. All right. I'm going to call the Katuitt Fire District Prudential Committee meeting of June 28th, 2021 to order. I'll do roll call starting on my right.
Ray Perron, Treasurer.
Seth Burdick, Prudential Committee.
Fran Parks Prudential. Thanks. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business is to elect a chair. Are there any nominations?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Eager, would you like to continue on as clerk for the Katuitt Fire District?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So, okay. So, all right. The church is on.
My name is Jennifer Lochran, and
Does that have a light on it?
thank you. Can you hear me? Good evening. My name is Jennifer Lochran, and I'm with the Katuitt Federated Church. I'm part of the Building Expansion Committee, and with me tonight is Peter Roner. And Peter and I want to thank you for your time to allow us to speak about our building expansion project. So I understand from Fran that as a committee, you were asked to look at or watch the presentation that we did with the Katuitt Civic Association last week. And we are here to answer any questions you may have, whether you watched the video or not, the recording, or attended the meeting. But I will briefly mention the points that I presented last week. And then Peter is here to show any parts of the building through his model that he has here or the diagram that he's brought in with you. So we'll take as little or as much as time that you want to afford us this evening, okay? So the way that I approach these updates, I put them in milestones by year. And so I'm going to go back to 2019 to give you a feel for how much we've put into the project since that time. I should mention there are 9 members of us on the team, and we pretty much have had no turnover with this team. So if I can remember them correctly, I've got Pastor Angie, Tim Wakefield, Carol Giller, John Murray, Pam Bowden, Peter and myself, and who am I missing, Peter? Oh, and I'm sorry, Dick Hamilton, are members of the committee, all very experienced in different aspects, from finance to marketing to communications, to Peter being an engineer for background purposes. So back in 2019, when we started really looking at this project, we first determined that we needed to do a feasibility study to make sure that we were going to be able to raise the money that was necessary for the project and the dream that we had set out. Working with a consulting firm called CCS Fundraising, and a very deliberate and detailed study and survey with the community and our congregation, we were able to set a goal of $3.5 million to be able to support our project. The fundraising did start in a silent phase, meaning that we approached certain people, particularly within the congregation in the community, to start our fundraising in 2019. And by the end of that year, we raised $1.96 million in pledges and direct donations, including a $250,000 match from a community member. So not somebody from our congregation, but somebody from the community. We also went with the leadership of John Murray, had discussions with UMC, the United Methodist Church leadership, about our properties. And when I say our properties, it's the ones that we used, but at the time we did not actually own them as assets. And those in particular were the parsonage that Pastor Angie and her family live in, and the church. So we started the discussions about those properties. All along, so including 2019, we had started with building design workshops with our congregation to make sure what we were designing was keeping in mind what they were looking for, and we were building to not only what we thought were the needs, but what was our different congregation members looking for. Then into 2020, even with the pandemic, we had some critical milestones that we were able to complete. We continued with our workshops. We were able to complete the property transfers that I mentioned to you earlier, and we actually had the deeds transferred to us for those two properties, so they are now part of our assets. We did open the capital campaign, so we put the capital campaign on postpone because we didn't think during the pandemic it was appropriate for us to do any full force fundraising. It just didn't make sense to do that. But that didn't mean that as a team, as the building expansion team, that we weren't meeting on a regular basis. In October of last year, after talking with a couple of construction, building, and architectural firms, we did go with selecting Conserve, which I'm sure you've seen in many different construction sites, and we're very pleased with the performance and how they've worked with us. Now coming into 2021, most of the year has been working with Conserve and fine-tuning the design. We did open the capital campaign to a public phase, meaning that we went to the congregation, asked them specifically to participate in making contributions, pledges, donations that made sense to them, that were meaningful, because we find that it's very important that we're getting 100% participation from our congregation members. We also started working with a grant writer because we know there's philanthropic money available to us, and she started working with us in March, and we feel very positive that we're going to be able to get some support through some private and public foundations. She's just started the work, and the one that we're very active with right now is the Community Preservation Committee that the town of Barnstable manages. And I'm sure that you're familiar with, even though this isn't a direct part of our building expansion, but it's very important from a revenue stream. We own the post office, and we are very close to finishing our lease negotiations with them. And in a couple months, our mortgage is going to be paid off. So that's going to be a very, very important revenue stream for us, as it has been, but in a different sense now since the mortgage is going to be paid off. And then probably the most important part, if you haven't heard, Craft Fest is happening in August. And shortly after Craft Fest, we will be doing the groundbreaking. A definitive date hasn't been picked yet, but September, October is very feasible that we'll be starting to do the groundbreaking. So before I bring Peter up, based on those particular points, are there any questions?
I have a question about the mortgage. Since the post office was paying for the mortgage,
Yes.
that's not going to increase your revenue
Well,
for the church, and it wasn't costing you anything.
well, the revenue will be
The rent.
will be the rent, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
But the mortgage was paid by
Correct,
yeah.
correct, yes. I'm sorry, Mark, I can't hear you.
You mentioned a possible start date. You mentioned a possible start date. What was that?
September, October of this year. So we have to get through Craft Fest and then prepare things after that.
And any idea how long construction might take?
Yeah, 10 months, yeah. I was going to say 45 weeks, but I think that's the same thing, right? Yeah. And we have expressed our desires with Conserve, and they have made us feel comfortable that disruption to the neighborhood, to traffic, to everything while they're building, they're very conscious that that's a high priority to us, that they'll do as best they can when they have the heavy equipment staged in places, that it's going to be as a high priority for them.
And where will it be staged during the, the
So
really heavy?
we are taking down the garage. Oh, I'll let Peter answer this.
Hi, I'm Pete Roner. It will be staged mostly in the area that I show as a parking lot. When we get to the diorama, I'll point out the parking lot area. But it's a large area. It'll be opened up first, and Conserve last week said that that's where they will attempt to put all their things that they need to.
I've been asked to ask by someone who has a concern about the parking once this footprint of the church is expanded.
Yes, well, the consideration was given by Conserve and said we should put a small parking area and I'll show it in the diorama. It will not offset a complete capacity change, but it will go well towards it.
Okay. I don't know if this is going to be in the new post office contract. I assume it would, but technically, the parking spots that rim the post office are supposed to be always left available for use of the post office 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Frequently, they're used on Sundays for the church, but that's just a friendly reminder.
Yes.
And are you putting in a new septic system?
Yes.
Is it going to be an IA system?
What's an IA?
Okay. Are you having a generator?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Those are my questions.
Good. Good. Okay. Do you want me to go through the diorama a little bit? Can we move the camera up? Is it available to go full screen? Sure. I'll bring it up. Sure. I'll walk up towards it. Okay. Look at that. Technology.
The future is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to do it a little differently than I did before. Hit some points that I didn't hit last week. Perhaps it'll bring in some more interest. That one will I get. Right, and I can lift from there. Yeah, on this, yes. Yeah. That's good.
That's good.
Can you make the screen any larger? Is that box? Yeah, that's good. Okay. Best we have. All right, currently our approach to the church is here. This would be School Street, and this is the park back in here. And our approach is here. This will all be demolished, and we will move the new entrance around to School Street and come in this way. Now I will rotate it. We can see that. And there is your new, that looks pretty good, I guess. You see that all right?
Yep.
Okay, so there's your new approach. And it's got a handicap ramp. We go around to High Street. Okay, you can see it here. This is the parking area that we're talking about over here. It's capable of probably about, that's what I wanted. That's great. Okay. That's probably about capable of 11 cars as I show it. The original sketch by Conserve suggested that it was going to be about Yeah, there we go. It'll be about 15, but I think it's going to really end up about 11 or 12. Okay, this is our new approach, and this is all handicap. And this is the current Bruce Hall, right in this area. And this is the craft room way over here. Okay, coming around to this side. Okay, there will be an approach, a walk, perhaps some steps going down into there. We have two levels, a lower level and the new fellowship hall up in this area. Our new kitchen will be located here, right in there. And now the biggest highlight of them all to us, we're excited about this one, is in this, let's see, get a little better. Yeah, that's good, that's good. In this area right here, this is a new patio right outside of the fellowship hall. So you have 3 doors approach to the fellowship hall and a nice lawn area on this side of it, so we can have seating. This is applicable for such things as Craft Fest, where we do some entertainment. This is good for outside services, which we are doing right now, and who knows what else. Okay, questions?
I have one. So the back of the new building there, which would be, I suppose, where 18 High Street used to stand, that's where that building will essentially sit, right? This new
This
fellowship
new
hall.
building, yes. Right.
What's the distance between the rear of that building and where, say, the playground is, as it features? Not on this diagram?
That's a very good question. It's shown in sketch form. You can see it too well. Okay. This is the setback line right here.
I see.
Okay, the setback line is the yellow line, and the other one, the black line, would be the end of the property.
Right, the division where the town park begins.
That's correct, yeah.
So just that side, or straddling that line, essentially, is where the playground sits.
Playground.
No,
is
sits
sitting
Further on to
right
it.
in-
Further
I see.
down,
I
further
get it.
down.
That's it. I get it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's roughly what, about 100 feet less?
the playground?
Just for Craft Fest purposes, did a scaling this morning to see how many sites we could get in next year. And the distance from here to the back stake here is 100 feet, 98 feet.
Right, so 50 feet, 60 feet from the far corner of the fence there. to-
Probably 40, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, that's
Yeah.
what I was curious about.
Next question.
I have another question. What funds are you going to be asking the CPC for? Purpose for those funds?
One. Okay, sure. No, you're closer to that.
Okay, so we've asked them, since it's the Preservation Committee, so that we're going to be focusing on most of what's in the church. So as Peter mentioned, we're moving the entrance of the church to the original location of the church. So Conserv was able to give us the costs associated with that. Fire suppression for the church specific, even though we're doing new fire suppression for the entire project, fire suppression, we were able to isolate the costs specifically to the church. The pews, the shingles, and we are bringing the shingles back to the look and feel of what we have right now. So what you're accustomed to.
The 3/4 inch.
Yeah. Are we going with a different size on the shingles?
The spacing between the shingle levels will be small.
Yeah. But it's still going to have the Cape Cod look, so we're not going to have that.
Pretty large right now.
Yeah.
Much wider between porches than on my house.
Right, but those are better, much stronger shingles than are on your house. Those are the shingles that have been there for 60 years.
Right.
They have really withstood the
Yeah,
project.
been there since.
The windows are something of interest of theirs. So though we didn't specifically say we wanted help with the windows. They have an interest because we've been talking about some of the windows that have been found up in the attic that we're going to be using, moving some of the windows that where they are placed right now to more places that make the most sense and that show the historical aspect of our building as well.
Those are stained glass windows that are in the attic, were in the attic.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. We are moving the windows that are on the High Street side over to the opposite side of the church. They'll be here. And the stained glass windows, we're proposing some positions in the narthex area of the entrance, so that one of them is on this wall, two of them are on these, the entrance vestibule on this wall, and there's another one in the interior wall inside, a separation wall between the narthex and the sanctuary.
And so we started meeting with Lindsay Council, the head of the CPC, a couple weeks ago. He came, he wanted a tour of the entire building. And then he came with Tom Lee late last week. So we know there's an interest on their part.
Okay.
And one thing I was remiss in, if I may, one thing I was remiss in saying during my presentation, as I said, at the end of 2019, we raised 1.96 million. Right now, we're at 129 donors, which equates to 2.85 million in pledges and donations. 70% of that's from the congregation and 30% of that is from the community.
That's good. So, any other questions? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
So, the next item was the redesigned website for the district, but it's not ready yet. So there are a few problems with that. So that'll be hopefully next time. And wanted to talk about continuing the Zoom meetings along with regular meetings. And we would see what everyone's feelings are on that topic.
So what is I mean, if continuing the Zoom meetings for remote participation purposes or strictly for like broadcasting? Is it, do you know what I mean?
It's for, well, broadcasting will be able to have videos of the meeting instead of just recordings.
Right.
And also for, people who want to listen to the meetings, like
Right.
Mr. Danhauser and the folks that are up there, Allison.
Right.
And, hopefully more community participation.
Right. That sounds good to me. I mean, I was just, because people can chime in during public comment during,
Yeah.
from this. Well, I didn't know if it was going to be like Channel 18 where we'll just have it being broadcast. It will be an interactive Zoom meeting.
We can't afford Channel 18.
You know what I mean?
So, just so I understand, in-person meetings with the addition of Zoom.
Yes.
Seth, did I hear you say that people can weigh in on Zoom?
Yeah, it would seem,
Yeah.
right? A public comment period. It seems good to me. I mean, we have the technology and stuff all in place. We got it. We might as well keep it, in my opinion.
I'm in favor of that.
Good. So I don't think I don't know if we have any money presently, but it would be much easier and convenient for the committees and anybody else if we can set up a full-time stationary camera, say up in the balcony, rather than the jumble of cords that we presently have in order to do this evening. So that's something that we need to work on. And I think that's, any other Zoom meeting questions?
Not for me.
Okay. So we'll move on to the treasurer's report.
I think everybody has a copy of my report, but I go through it. In the revenue category, there's really two significant items. Number one is the low collection rate in current real estate taxes. We're standing at about 85%, which is significantly lower than we've experienced in the past. Last year, we were low in May, but we had a big pickup in June. And looking at our bank receipts so far in June, that does not appear that it's going to happen. So we're probably going to end up at about 85%. The average for the past 4 years has been about 96%. It's hard to identify causes for that. I think overall, it's probably a COVID-related event. We've had 9 months of people being, if you will, restricted in their movements. And so I suspect that some of that has played back into the collection of taxes. Doesn't mean we won't eventually get that money. We will continue to collect the current year taxes in subsequent years. Although notably, subsequent years, this year is down as well. So it's across the board within this district.
Is it across the board for the town?
I have not determined that. I know in my other district, that's not the case.
Okay.
West Barnstable is not the same?
No, we caught up in the last 2 months, and we're now running at about where we normally do.
Okay.
Normally, you'll hit around 98% or so, and 2% is collected later on. But it's a significant shortfall. Fortunately, with the dry summer, the water revenue more than made up for that shortfall. So there's no concern from a district standpoint in terms of revenue generation to cover our necessary expenses. Turning to water revenue, it's up about 38% over our budget, and that's due to the dry summer and the high rate of consumption that existed through really October, November, as I recall. In the ambulance area, we're just below budget and looks like we will end up about $10,000 below budget if the current rate continues. However, on the positive side, we've just collected $30,000 from MassCar, which reimburses us for Medicaid and Medicare transports. And so we'll be back over budget when you count that in. In the other category, we've gotten some of our CARES money, and we've been notified that we can anticipate the full FEMA contract grant, which is $107,000. I anticipate that will be fiscal 22 revenue, which is just as well to have it fall into next year, since I think we're in pretty solid shape revenue-wise this year. COVID-related through the town. FEMA is the federal government money. Originally, it was to cover 70%, and CARES was to make up the balance. And then the administration decided to reimburse us for 100% of those COVID expenses that we applied for. On the expense side, in the Prudential area, we're going to exceed the salary budget primarily because of the work that was done on the COVID grant, which was very detailed and very time consuming, and on the refinancing. I'm going to be asking the committee to approve a $10,500 transfer from the reserve fund to the Prudential salary expense line to cover that overage. On the expense side, the budget is just about level. We'll probably exceed it, but that doesn't take into account the $48,000 of one-time expenses related to the refinancing that was approved in the special district meeting the past fall. So when you take that into account, we're well within the Prudential and Finance Department expense budget. The fire department is also well within their budget. The salary budget is lower due to overtime, and that's primarily good fortune and good management. The expenses were under overall, and I think that's probably still a COVID-related event, as it's very hard to get people in the early part of the year to do the services that we need. And then you certainly see that in the water department. Water department salaries are below budget. The assistant superintendent left during the year, and he was replaced with a staff member at a significantly lower salary. And that decrement, less the increase that the water department instituted, results in a shortfall in their budget.
Shortfall, I mean, they used the remaining salary of the assistant superintendent to raise the salaries of the rest of the water employees, correct?
Correct, but
With some money set aside for hiring a new employee.
Right.
And they exceeded that?
they still came in under budget.
Okay,
There was a delay, I believe, in hiring the staff person, and I believe they purposely calculated the interim wage increase to ensure that they came in within budget.
okay.
On the expense side in the water department, they're significantly below because of the lack of engineering costs. And again, I think that goes to COVID. We weren't engaging in projects this year with the COVID event, and that significantly reduced the water department expenditures for the year. Debt service or street lights came in lower. There was very little maintenance this year. I think you mentioned, Fran, that there was another street light that we're going to have, but that hasn't come in.
This street light's coming on from a slow boat from China, let
I
me
see.
tell you.
Yeah, there's been a change in
Yeah, all right, yeah.
the contract with Siemens, and they've brought in someone else to do that. And right now, as you know, we're going through kind of a kabuki dance about the contract. We've engaged or we are cooperating with the Cape Cod Light Compact attorney who has been reviewing the contract or reviewing the change proposal and making suggestions to Siemens on what will serve the members on the Cape. That hasn't been resolved yet, and so I'm sure maintenance is not going to happen until it is resolved. But that, again, is a small shortfall from budget on the positive side. On the debt side, as you know, in the special district meeting, it was approved to retire all of our short-term debt. So that increased $664,000 from budget to authorize a full $970,000 payment of our short-term debt. So right now, we have no short-term debt, and going into fiscal '22, there is no renewal cost for the rollover of short-term debt that we normally have every year. So that's a savings that will roll into next year, as well as the interest savings that we'll have. On the benefit side, we will come under budget. It was the medical option was a little over budget, but it was more than offset by a savings on the medical insurance side. So we'll end up on the positive side on that budget category. Library is on budget. Encumbrances are a little bit slow. I think that's probably, again, a COVID thing. People thought that they could get work done, and it looks like they may not be able to. That all runs out on June 30th, and that money will then come back into the general fund if we're unable to spend that. So the reserve fund, as I said, I requested moving $10,000, $10,500. That will reduce that down to 49.5 that will be released to free cash. I think overall, with the positive funds that were generated on the revenue side and the savings on budget in just about every category, we should have a fairly strong year in free cash this year. I haven't been able to calculate it yet because we have to really wait for the June results to do that.
Okay.
Any questions?
No,
Not
I
for
don't
me.
think so. Can you make the motion?
Yeah, I'll move to that. Let's see. So I'll make a motion. I move that the treasurer be directed to transfer $10,500 from the reserve fund to Article 4 for the labor and salaries of the finance department.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Katuitt School Committee. Mark, I notified, after the annual meeting, I notified the town the day after to let them know that the district had voted to negotiate and accept the transfer of the school property to the district. And has a meeting been set yet to?
We are still working on that. The current date suggested are July 6, 7, 8, or 9. I think David Anthony may be on vacation this weekend. Just checked on that before I came over here, and we still did not have a response from him for a proposal for those dates, but we're optimistic it'll be one of those.
Okay. And the other item of notice of interest about the Katuitt School is that there's been a complaint filed to the Attorney General's bid office concerning the use of, continuing use of the Space Needs project to continue on with that. Prior to even putting that on the warrant, it was reviewed by, it's Deborah Anderson is the attorney's name, and she said it was perfectly reasonable and acceptable to continue with that original Space Needs project. So at the moment where it stands is the person who's made the complaint is hasn't said that they will have an attorney ready to confer with Ms. Anderson on July 12th. And that's,
And just to be clear, Deborah Anderson is an attorney with the Massachusetts AG's bid office.
right.
And she requested a analysis, so to speak, or
Is it dead?
just to be clear, Deborah Anderson is the attorney in the Massachusetts AG bid office from whom that assessment was requested.
So, okay. So, any questions about that?
Well, does anybody have a feel for the town and what I mean, this meeting is a preliminary meeting, the one that's coming up in July 6, 7, 8, or is this going to be, do you have any feeling for what the tenor of it will be?
At this point, we believe, based on preliminary discussions, that they are interested in a transaction that would result in the property coming to Katuitt. And
Right.
by property, that is still under discussion.
Right,
Exactly.
the boundary, how many
The
acres, which
boundaries,
parcel, and how divided.
Exactly. But we have been dealing just with David Anthony at this point. One of the aims of the meeting is to try to get as many people from the town, from as many different departments as may be required to
Right.
get to a definitive answer. So we will see on
Right.
the week of the 6th.
And ultimately, will be Mark Ells who will be the final arbiter and negotiator, I wonder.
I
Just out of
believe that
curiosity.
there has to also be a vote
Of
of
the
the
council,
council.
right.
And I believe that it's a 2/3 vote
Right.
of the council. So, there are still hoops to be jumped through.
Right.
for
And
sure.
that's kind of what I'm concerned about because, with the town and based on, our dealings with them up to this point, we have a kind of a 12-month window, right? In which to accomplish this whole thing.
The town's not interested in having,
yeah.
having that building during the winter,
Of course, because then they got to heat
because
it.
they have to heat it. It's either they have to heat it or they have to pay to, shut it down. So I think, and, what they're trying to do is avoid the $1 million cost
Right, of demolition.
demolition or, whatever.
Yeah.
So they're just finishing up their own budget season, so hopefully it's either going to be Mr. Alves or the assistant town manager. I think that's what David Anthony said.
And who is the assistant town manager?
Mr. Claiborne?
I'm not familiar with that name.
Claiborne, I think.
In that regard, we did do a little follow-up with regard to that demolition cost. We've been kind of thrown around the $1 million number, which was evidently put together by an internal town analysis, and we've requested that, but we have yet to get it, so we're not sure how detailed that is.
And how accurate.
And how accurate, exactly. And that is one of the goals of the meeting. We may, well, we should wait to see what we get from the town, but one of the things we may want to do is get our own assessment as to the cost of demolition of that building, if that's one of the possibilities, which I think still is. That is that the building,
Right.
the school would be demolished.
Right. And that would fall into the category of the space needs assessment and from Catalyst now, not Finuccio Brown. And that's what they're called now, right? Catalyst. And so I guess,
I'm not sure that it will.
No.
Catalyst specifically declaims any assessment for hazardous waste, for example.
right. So that means no asbestos, no.
They're not going to tell us how much it's cost to remove asbestos.
That's
so-
going to be when it comes in the bill.
We'd have to go out for an RFP, request for
Right.
proposals, to get a price for what the demolition cost would be.
As separate from the space needs as it is
Yeah.
currently
think.
funded.
But I think, I suspect, I think they're presently doing an RFP for the demolition of the Morrison's Mill School.
Right. That made it into their budget
Yeah,
this year. Didn't
so, that's going to be a good
it? Right. Indicator.
bellwether as to how much Katuitt will cost, because it was built at the same time.
Right. And is roughly the same size and footprint,
Yeah.
similar boiler and all that. Well, that was my only thought. Just that I know with the town, it's a sprawling machine, and to get, they can be slow going sometimes. And the clock, I feel like the clock is ticking, but it may not be. You know what I mean? So that's my only concern as it pertains to the school.
All right. Policy advisory report.
Policy advisories. So we had a meeting at the beginning of this month, and I'll refer to the minutes here so that I can, there were several things. Well, there were a couple of concrete takeaways. One thing which I sent to you, Fran, which was and we had discussed it at a previous meeting, but not in any great depth. And, we can talk about it now. I don't know if you have a copy, Mark. It was the historical documents, I suppose, what would you call it? The historical documents policy?
I don't believe I ever got that.
No?
No.
I thought I attached it when I sent you an email about it, but at any rate, maybe I didn't. But if you want to read it, I can read it out loud. Not that it was a suggestion of the committee that we maintain it would be a historical documents pertaining to things that are presented to the various committees, policies that were suggested but not necessarily adopted, changes to the bylaws and that sort of thing, just as a running historical narrative. And as you can see, it's right there.
Yeah.
I don't know what did you
What
want to
would
get,
be
Mark?
the criteria for inclusion?
I'm sorry?
The criteria for inclusion if it was proposed and made it to a vote in terms of bylaw change or policy.
The bylaw changes are all recorded in the bylaws.
Right. Well,
So,
obviously.
yeah.
Well,
But these would be unsuccessful
right, it
votes.
would be unsuccessful or successful, just as just a historical narrative, essentially, of policy changes and attempted policy changes.
And this would be going forward, or would this be?
Right, going forward, not retroactively. I don't think we'd have to go and fish them out and see. We can discuss it further if.
There's no place to fish it out from. That's the
Right,
problem.
it's in the ether. But if you want to review it, we didn't have it on the agenda tonight specifically, so we can't vote on it at any rate, I don't think
Yeah.
so. I'll circulate it once more
Okay.
so that you can have a look at it. We also discussed the public comment policy as I presented it and was passed last time. And it was the feeling of members of the committee that it was not broad enough in terms of, we changed how it went on was, well, the recommendation at the public comment, the Prudential Committee amended the policy to say, it is the policy of the Katuitt Fire District that all committees and subcommittees are expected, that was one of the changes that we made, as opposed to required, expected to place public comment on their posted agendas. And we moved and then voted on that and approved it as expected, as opposed to required. And also the feel was that there should be 2 public comment periods as opposed to one being prior to the meeting and one post-meeting. So that was one thing we did talk about. I don't know how you made.
Seth, just so I understand, this recommendation would be that the Water, Prudential, and Fire Committee on all of their agendas would be expected to have.
Right, because as it stood, there was no policy, relative to public comment. So the idea was to have it be initially in the committee to be required, which I then amended or changed, presented to this committee to be expected to have at least appear on the agenda, because it doesn't always, but it usually does. But for all committees, subcommittees, and organs of the fire district. So it was the feeling of the committee or members of the committee that we should revisit it and change it possibly to be more binding, and then also to have 2 periods of public comment as opposed to 1.
I certainly have no objection to that. I'm not sure what's the purpose of the 2 public comment periods.
Well, it was the feeling of some that if you have something you want to say before the meeting, or say you have that at the beginning and at the end, or just at the beginning or at the end, that if you make commentary at the beginning and then the issue is discussed, then you can't then further comment on it. Or if it's the end and you want to comment on something that's in the meeting, that you don't, you get either, and then you have to wait however long the time frame is in order to then revisit and have your public comment come out.
Well, if it's the end of the meeting, then you obviously have the opportunity
To discuss what
to
was in the
comment
meeting.
whatever was discussed at the meeting.
I think the feeling is mainly that people, there are people who believe that we should have more involvement in this setting, in this, the meeting itself.
I understand there are people that feel that they should be able to ask questions and join in the discussions during the meeting. We are a board of elected officials, and that is, it's different from the town. When the town has certain items that are on their agenda, such as voting for money, then they're required to have a public hearing at that time. Our public hearing was our annual meeting. And after that, that's when it's not the same as the town. The town also only has one public hearing, public comment time. And, and there are some meetings that, as I said last time, that occur when public comment is just not relevant. And that would be when we have one example is when we have the negotiating committee for the firefighters' contract negotiations. The negotiations, the first meeting, each side presents the items that they wish to have discussed. At the second meeting, it's voted on that those are what items are going to be discussed, and that's it. There are no changes for the rest of the discussions and meetings. So there really is we can't answer any questions about what's going on in the negotiations, and there's any public comment that's made is not going to change any of the discussion in the public, in the negotiations. So I just think that, it's just not necessary when, for that particular situation. And also the open meeting law doesn't require public comment, but says that we should hold it. So I think, one public comment period is sufficient, but that's just my opinion. If you want, we can take a vote on it and we can try it out for 6 months. And if it's works fine, and if it, if we end up with, no public comment at one point, we can go back to single public comment, which I think is sufficient.
Do you want to speak? You don't have a working microphone.
I think, is my microphone working now?
You see, there's a light on,
We got it. It's off again.
Dead battery.
dead battery.
Okay. I guess I'm not familiar with the union negotiations at all, and I will defer to you as to how that work. I guess that would be covered, in my view, by the expected, meaning we expect to have them at all meetings, but that would be.
Right, there will be obvious exceptions.
That would be the obvious exception. I think it would be a great idea if it's not required to have public comment well, I think public comment should be allowed at all of the committee meetings. Whether it's 1 or 2, I feel less strongly on, but I'm happy to vote on a motion to at least do the public comment expected at each meeting.
So then I'll make a motion to amend this policy as adopted last. To, of course, we'll keep the expected, place public comment on their posted agendas at the open and close of the meeting.
I'm okay with that. I would second that motion.
All right, I've so moved. Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay. Okay, passes 2 to 1.
And then relative to our last meeting, there was some discussion about, preliminary discussion about would it be appropriate for the district to adopt, the strictures of Proposition 2.5. And that was essentially it. I'm going to review. I looked at the minutes earlier, but I just want to make sure I don't miss anything.
Consolidation.
Consolidation, of course. Yep, that was a topic of discussion. Generally improving citizen participation, and we'll have other things coming up, and we can talk about, if you want to review, I'll send that policy about the historical documents around. If you want to look at it, we can have it appear on the agenda next time.
So I just wanted to make a comment about the meeting. In the minutes, I saw that a committee member asked why the moderator starts the annual meeting off by reading a prepared statement that includes a statement that the elected officials do not have to answer questions asked by the citizens. The committee members were hoping it could be changed to make it more community friendly. The annual meeting is a legislative body meeting, and by law, we can only discuss the items that are on the warrant and the items that are included in the warrant, and no other items can be discussed during the meeting. And that's why, other questions would not be answered because they're not appropriate at the time of the annual meeting. So, okay.
That's fine by me.
So is there public comment? Mrs. Gardner?
Cynthia Gardner, 94 School Street. I have a couple of questions. My first question was, when the treasurer was giving his report, he neglected, or by mistake, missed a whole item. And if he could explain to me the transfer portion, he didn't discuss this, and why you felt it has to do with the water department transfers. Can you explain to me what that statement means?
The bylaw that created the water department stabilization predicated on the meter count was also modified to include the accomplishment of collections of the projected revenue. So in other words, at the beginning of the year, using a very simplistic example, if there were 100 meters at $3 a meter at the count in December, at the beginning of the fiscal year, I would transfer $300 to the Water Department Stabilization Fund. However, if I found that the prior year, they only had collected 270 of the 300, I would have to reduce the amount that was contributed by that $30. And that's what that refers to.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't understand what it meant. My next question is for the clerk. At the close of the annual meeting, did all the newly elected and elected officials that are, extended there, were they given the public information material, and has it all been completed like it's supposed to be within 2 weeks?
I did receive information from
Okay, so,
Again, I received all the information from the newly elected officials.
okay, so that being said, going forward, we have a little glitch with the school committee. I don't have a problem with it because I think the school committee is doing a wonderful job. But since two members of this committee sit on that committee, it also has to be posted as a Prudential committee meeting because two of you will be attending that school committee meeting. So I just would like you to go forward, remember that, and make sure it's properly posted. And then that was it for my questions for this evening.
Is there any other public comment from anyone? Hearing none, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.